Test-driven development is a bad practice. Test-driven development is dumb. It doesn't give anything at all. I hear criticism to TDD almost every day, and almost every time those criticism comes from a poor understanding of practice, from people that are having hard times in leaving their habits behind them, embracing change, as Agile suggests, and so they find reasons to avoid going deeper into such a great practice. So my idea for today's episode is to fight against those ideas. I collected some articles online that I will link in the description where people criticize TDD, and I will respond to them. Basically, I will explain what mistakes they are doing and why they misunderstood, or I will accept their critic and describe why this critic is real, if there are any. Welcome back in Learn Agile Practices. I'm Daniele Dentedev. This is the weekly Pomodoro, our weekly 25 minutes episode on the podcast, where I share with you some thoughts about Agile practices and software development in general, and I try to make learning informative and nice to hear. As you know, I'm alternating English and Italian, so this is another English episode for you. And now we are going to jump into the episode, but first, all the things related to social and YouTube. So subscribe, leave a comment, share the episode with everyone you think could be interested, and make sure to go in the description, because you will not only find the articles I will quote today, but you will also find all the links for Learn Agile practices. In particular, about TDD, I've just launched my 5 days email course, which has already received amazing 5-star reviews on Gumroad. And it's the idea behind this course is to create the best entry door for test-driven development. So have a look if you're interested into it. And now, let's start. Okay, so let's start with the first article, which is available Medium from Char Eli, and it's called Why TDD is Bad and How to Improve Your Process. The article is generally speaking big critic to TDD, but it's based on a clickbait headline, to be fair. So the author states very clearly at the beginning that he's not against test and is not against TDD in general, but is the idea of being test driven that triggers him, so he's criticizing it. And there are some things that are not convincing me on this article, which I will try to explain. So for example, the first point, which is one of the points I most of all discuss about TDD also in my course, is that he suggests that a design phase should be added before TDD begins. A design phase. So design, I don't agree. We don't need a design phase before, because that's the whole point of TDD. When you are test driving, you are writing your your code starting from tests. This means that you're starting from the point of view of the user, which is the most important design decision you need to take. How the client will interact with your code. Once you have decided that, TDD has nothing to do with your internal design choices and with your implementation details, because all the tests should test is behavior. They shouldn't care about implementation details. So That's why I don't agree. It's not about design, okay? The design phase, he says, it's more about, in my opinion, exploration or analysis. And yes, you should have a look at the system before jumping into coding to have an idea of what you should do, because you must have an idea of the expectation. Okay, you must ensure that what the expectation are is clear, because you need to formalize the expectation in the test list. The very first step in the TDD canon process described by Kent Beck is to write down a test list. But again, you should focus on behavior. That's the whole point of TDD. Driving your decisions, but not taking the decisions for you. So if you feel that you know too little about the system and you want to deep dive before into the possible design choices, that's okay. But it's on you. It's not about TDD. But you shouldn't take decisions written on stone in that moment, because otherwise you're not driving by tests, right? So the problem I see here is an habit. We are used, since we are not learned to work in TDD, we are used to decide the design before writing code, of course, because we don't want to write it just as it comes. But with TDD, we need to first accept that it's not about design at all. Okay, the first iteration of TDD, it's about code that works. The objective of TDD is clean code that works, and the clean code part includes readability, modificability, so changeability, so maintainability, but also the design, of course, because the design has an impact on readability and maintainability of the code. But the first step is going from red to green. And when you go to green, you don't care about design. You just need to make it work. Because then tests are your safety net to make design choices, better design choices, in a safe way, because you have the tests that guarantee you that it's working. That's the whole point of TDD. So yes, you can and you should have a look at your system to understand which opportunities you have, because it makes you probably have a better understanding, especially when the system is new. But you should take the decisions only after you achieved the green step. That's the point of TDD. And that's the advantage, because you are doing it in a safe moment where everything is working. So even if you are not able for any reason in that moment to improve the design, that's fine. The code is working. Okay? And you will always have the test. So later on, when you will learn something new, you will have a better idea, you still can refactor it. That's the point of TDD. He also makes an example of making an API calls against different servers, like more than 100 servers, and aggregate the result and then return the count. That's not a behavior. That's not a feature. The fact that the function is doing this, it's just an implementation detail. So if he wants to test that, that's a mistake. That's just implementation. Okay? He's probably just asking, from the behavior point of view, he's probably just asking for a count of something, and that's all the test should check, if the count is correct, and that's it. The fact that he needs to make 100 calls to make this count, it's not to be tested. It's an implementation detail. It shouldn't even be in the name of the function, because it's an implementation detail. We only need to refer to behaviors. And I would also think more about why the system needs more than 100 requests, but I don't know the context, so that can even be possible, but still, it's implementation details. So you shouldn't focus on that in the test. And that's a testing problem still, not a TDD problem. Then he puts a lot of focus in this article on the fact that TDD has a cost, but then he described this cost as the cost of the tests that are coupled with the implementation And that's the main point in the article where he's stating, I didn't understand what TDD is and what testing is. You should never, let me state it again, never test implementation details. I don't care to test how the method is doing what he promised me to do. I just need to test that he's doing what he's promising from the point of view of input and output. That's it. He's promising me to make a count. I want to check the count. That's it. I'm testing a calculator and I want to test that the sum between 2 plus 3 is 5. Fine. I will test that. I will give an input 2 and 3, and the method sum is returning 5. That's it. If internally, for some reason, I implement this by adding 1 plus 1 plus 1 plus 1 for any reason, the test doesn't care. Just doesn't care. To conclude, to finish with this article, in the end of the article, he also even suggests BDD, which is behavior-driven development, which is basically acceptance test-driven development, and that's actually just TDD. It's just that the cycle is moved to a higher level, so not at feature, let's say, use case test scenario of a single component, but the test scenario of the entire feature. So it's at a higher level, but it's exactly the same. It has some specific technicalities related to the fact that you should write those tests, acceptance tests, with the stakeholders, or anyway, a person that can help you understand what are the right acceptance criteria, but still it's TDD. It's just making explicit expectation of the feature, which is exactly what the test list of TDD is for. So he's a bit confused, in my opinion, about TDD, and I hope that this information I'm giving you can help you also to navigate the web and identify the content that has real value in it, because this is a very big problem in our world today. The second article is from Mike Cronin, that states very clearly at the beginning of his article that for him, test-driven development is dumb. And he invites to fight him, so here I am. He says that oftentimes the product request will change mid-work, or you realize that the feature can't work as requested. Maybe your original understanding was flawed. And so in these cases, TDD is a problem for him, because he basically say that he finds himself to change test a lot, and you shouldn't, right? You shouldn't change test because the behavior shouldn't change. But if you're stating that you have problems in things related to behavior, such as the product request change, so the behavior change, or the feature can't work as requested because we didn't know that we had a constraint on the technicalities maybe, so we can't do what we promised, that's a behavior problem. It will necessarily impact test. It's not a problem related to TDD. It's a problem related to the fact that you don't know enough about your system, but still TDD done properly can help you anticipate those problems. This is another insight of another person that doesn't apply the test list in TDD, because if you try to do TDD with the test list, and especially if you do it with acceptance test driven development, so you write down the acceptance criteria for your feature and then you start from there, you will realize very soon that those acceptance criteria and those expectations cannot be fulfilled. You will realize very soon that you have those kind of constraints, and it will also help you to understand that how to achieve them, because you are in a position where you are testing it and the test is failing. So if you can make it green, it's working. It's just the best way. You would have this problem anyway, even without TDD, what you can do to solve these problems is not related to TDD. It's probably to admit yourself that you don't know enough of the system, and before promising things, asking to do an experiment or spike to ensure that what's being requested can be done. That's not related to TDD. And still, most people think that TDD is worth only when you go to production with your code, which is a good approach. But still, once you become a master of TDD, I can tell you that even in a spike, if I can do TDD, I can write down the expectation I have from the spike as a test. So if the tests are green, the spike is passed and is a positive outcome. Otherwise, it's not. So we need to be careful to criticize those kind of things, because they are so powerful that there's probably always a reason. For example, to make a more concrete example, I've already talked about this, but I've built an entire system in TDD that was a food delivery app that was communicating with multiple external systems. Most of them were not trustable. For example, we have some external hardwares that we interact via APIs. We had, I don't know if you ever worked with the small printers that the restaurants use to print the orders. Those are hell. You can't trust them, basically. So you need to have a very safe way to send the data to be printed. And also the format is very, very specific and weird. It was a very highly exploratory business where things was changing continuously, but TDD helped us. TDD was helping me in making it clear that things were changing. Okay, it's not a problem. We need to accept that things can change. It's not about stopping things to change, because it's impossible. But if you have the expectations that are stated clearly, it's visible that things are changing. And this is true. What's the problem? You prefer that things change without making it visible? I don't think it's wise, because things may change in places you don't expect. So we need to be careful by saying these kind of things, in my opinion. And he also says that there are a lot of ways to code, and we need to stop holding any one of them as the best. I partially agree. I can't agree 100%. First of all, because I also believe that we need to start accepting scientific approach as something real in our industry. For example, the book Accelerate and the State of DevOps that every year goes out, prove the effectiveness of such practices, TDD included. TDD is actually one of the most powerful practices that emerge from that research, and it's a scientific approach. So you can't just say, I don't believe it, okay? You have to make an alternative scientific research to prove the opposite, if you're able to. I'm not saying that we need to trust it blindly. Everyone is aware, also the creator, that this kind of research has limits, but still it's the best way we have today to evaluate the practices and to evaluate software teams. So I think that we need to take it as the best way, which means we don't trust blindly, as I said. We still take it with some grain of salt, but we also need to admit that it's the best thing we have. So some practices are better than others. This is for real. We need to accept it. Then, of course, no one can force you to do TDD, because it just doesn't work. If you're not learning TDD, if you're not improving TDD, and you're not willing to do it, how can I make you work TDD by forcing you? It wouldn't be productive, right? But what I try to do is to expose what people are missing by not doing TDD. Because I've seen great developers not doing TDD. But if I think back, they was reaching similar result, not the same, but similar. But they was losing and investing so much energy, so much focus, so much cognitive load. It was exhausting to achieve such kind of result. TDD makes it easier. This is another point I touch a lot in my email course. And the point is, TDD makes achieving clean code that works every day for our career sustainable because it reduces the cognitive load and focus and energy that requires. This is amazing. This is powerful. So if you are aware of this and you refuse to do TDD for any reason, I need to respect this because I can't force you, of course, even if it's hard. I've never seen someone aware of what TDD can give him to not do TDD. I've just seen people that was not understanding and fully understanding what TDD was giving them, refusing it. So it's hard, but even if it happens, I can respect you if you know what you're talking about. But if you don't, it's a bit hard to trust you that your way is better, because the entire world is giving us proof that that approach is working. There are no limits in the context, etc. So no excuses, but you need to at least try to understand. That's my point. I try to give all the information I can to people to understand what they're missing. Then, yet, if they are still fine with that, I can't force anyone, of course. One last article I will try to quickly read with you because it's very interesting. It's Test-Driven Development is Fundamentally Wrong from Hackathon, which is a very important blog, and sadly he wrote this piece of article. Basically, this article has a lot of issues. He continuously talks about testing design, like if testing design is a good idea, which is not. It's just not. So he doesn't know about testing when he wrote this article. So he's not only misunderstanding TDD, but he's misunderstanding testing, and therefore he's misunderstanding TDD. It merely focuses on tests in this article, always mistaking that you should not test design, but testing behavior instead. He explicitly writes that design always changes, so the tests need to change. That's not true. Tests need to change when behavior change. That is inevitable, because we need to test the behavior, not the design. If that happens, you are having problems in your test, not with TDD, but with testing. And then he tried to speak a bit more about TDD, but what is missing is that it's a technique to drive software decisions through testing. You don't just write tests before so that you can use them to check the behavior. You write tests first so that moment where you're writing the test becomes the moment where you take the decisions on how the client interact with your piece of code. So you're taking decisions about the design from the external point of view. Then the internal part, implementation details, etc., just doesn't care for the test. How the behavior you're promising will be implemented, it's not a matter for testing. What I mean, just some words about what I mean by driving decisions, which is another main point of the email course, by the way. It means that when you're writing the test, for example, for a new calculator class, and you want to implement the method sum to make the sum of two numbers, the class doesn't exist. So you start writing the test and you, at some point, decide to make a new instance of the calculator class, and the class doesn't exist. If you think about it, when you were writing that test, you decided in that moment how to call the class calculator. You decided the name of the class while during the test. This is what I mean when I say that test-driven development is called this way, because the test-first approach is used to drive software decisions. Those kind of decisions are taken in the test because they are about how the client interacts with you and what behavior you are promising. Then the internal details, the test doesn't care about internal implementation details. Tests just only care about how to interact with your code and what behavior they are promising so that they can test it. That's it. So, and by the way, this is another point in favor of TDD, this kind of approach, because he's forcing you to not take internal design decisions when you're writing the test. So the test is not coupled to internal design decisions and to internal implementation, because the implementation doesn't exist. So you can't couple the test to the implementation, because it is just not here, not there when you're writing the test yet. So again, the problem of not knowing what to build, for example, can't be solved by any practice. It's not about TDD, it's not about test later, test first, whatever. You need to understand what you need to do to be a successful software developer, of course. And TDD just gives you a way to formalize the expectation in the test list. That's it. So here we are for today, closing in time with our Pomodoro. Just a quick reminder that you can follow me and check me, because I'm running some free webinar on our webinar about TDD introduction, so you can hear even more about this practice. And there is the email course. So remember to go in the description and have a look, because it's a very, very powerful tool to learn TDD correctly without falling into misconceptions and pitfalls that people usually fall into. Thanks everyone for listening. Remember to leave a comment or join the Telegram channel to be able to comment with the other members of the community. Thanks, and see you next week. And until next time, happy coding.